G'day guys, JJ here, and I've got a pretty fun one lined up for you today. Got this corkboard behind me, it's a map of the world, and I'm more or less going to be ticking off or sticking pins in everywhere that I've been over the last 27 years of my life. This isn't a new idea or a new concept by any means. This one though is a corkboard map rather than the scratch map I've seen a lot of other people using. A friend of mine had this hang up in her house, thought it looked really cool. It's from Splosh. And yeah, so basically just gonna be chucking those pins in. Got a few ideas, a few stories to tell ya. So yeah, let's get stuck into it. So how I think I'm gonna do this, I've set aside some different colored pins, and I think I'm gonna pin the map by continent by color. So you know, all of Africa one color, all Asia one color. And I think in the end that'll look pretty cool. All right, so country number one, I was of course born in Australia, and I was born just outside of Sydney, and then spent most of my life growing up on a place called the Central Coast, which is about an hour north of Sydney. All right, so first pin, these are pretty tiny, but hopefully when the map starts to fill out a bit, it'll look a bit better. All right, so pin number one, Sydney. Oh, that's as far as it goes. Cool, that's exciting. Now I reckon I'll be putting several pins across Australia because it is such a massive country and have traveled it fairly extensively. As kids, we did travel a little bit. We went up to the Gold Coast a few times for family holidays, went down to Victoria, but I have revisited those places in my adult life, so I reckon I'll pin those and tell a few stories a little bit later on. So my first international trip was part of a family holiday in 2010. It was actually part of a cruise. Australians love cruises. And yes, we were out in international waters on the boat a lot of the time, but then we stopped at a few of the Pacific islands along the way. We went to New Caledonia and Vanuatu on this first trip. It was a pretty good time from what I can remember. I got braids, I embraced a tropical lifestyle. So those were the first two international countries. I don't know which one came first, but New Caledonia and Vanuatu. So the following year in 2011, we went on another family holiday to Fiji. This one wasn't a cruise. We flew straight into Fiji and it was basically just chill times, hanging around by the beach, the pool, snorkeling. I was able to order my first beer at the bar because the legal drinking age in Fiji is 17. And I remember one of the highlights for me was we went to this eco park where we saw a lot of the native Fijian species, crested iguanas, banded iguanas, gorgeous lizards. And yeah, it was just a great little family getaway. And they are going to be tiny on this map. So 2011 was my first trip on my own. I just turned 18 and I went to the United States of America. Not all of the USA, only California. I was there for about 3 weeks. Long story short, I made pretty good friends with someone from California that was volunteering in Australia. And after they got back, they just invited me to go hang out and see their state, which was sick. I recall being pretty nervous because it was the first time I'd done such a long flight. But overall, it was a really cool trip. Started in LA, checked out Hollywood, Universal Studios, ticked off a lot of pretty touristy things to do in California, Disneyland or Disney World, can't remember which one it is. Went up to San Francisco, checked out the Golden Gate Bridge, ate heaps of clam chowder, checked out the redwoods, and then went down to San Diego and spent a couple of days checking out the world famous San Diego Zoo and Safari Park down there. I'd love to do more of the States one day and just do a massive road trip all the way around, but we'll have to see when that happens. So the USA or North America will only be getting one pin, and I picked yellow, just because. All right. Now in 2012, I went on another cruise, which took me up to Cairns. I think Cairns is about here. And one of my biggest regrets is that I haven't been back up there. When you're on a cruise, you only stop at places for like a day or two, and I cannot give you a good reason why I haven't been back to Cairns. Now 2014 was another pretty big trip. It was my first time in Asia. I went with my beautiful girlfriend. We went to Thailand, Singapore, and Malaysia. These are countries that I have returned back to over the years, but those first trips were still super memorable. And at the risk of embarrassing myself a little bit here, this trip I was in full-blown JJ wildlife documentary mode. The little brand I was trying to create was called For the Wild. This is For the Wild with JJ Emerson. And more or less anything that had to do with animals or nature, we got out the camcorder, recorded that. My girlfriend Sammy was such a sport, always filming me, she never complained. Those videos are all up on my YouTube page still somewhere, so if you want to go check them out, off you go, but no judgy. So in Thailand, we spent about a week at the Elephant Nature Park, which was really cool as part of their volunteering programs, you know, like just preparing food for the elephants, enrichment, cleaning up after them, and it more or less was my first experience with eco-volunteering. A lot of the elephants had come from trekking histories or logging histories, and they have a fair bit of freedom at this place. So that's why we chose it. So we spent about a week there, and then explored a bit around Chiang Mai and Bangkok. Bear in mind, this was my first time in Asia, and I definitely didn't dive into it like I would now, to the point where we weren't even comfortable enough to try out street food. We got screwed over plenty of times in the markets, but the trip was still awesome. And I honestly think this is the one that ignited the fire, the travel bug. And as you will see, I have returned back to Southeast Asia several times over the years. We didn't explore much of Malaysia this time. We spent a bit of time in KL and then got a really good deal and just basically hung out at a tropical resort for a week. And then Singapore just ticked off all the amazing things that you can do there. So for Asia, I have picked green. I guess it's a very tropical spot. There's lots of jungles, so I think green suits. Okay, so we got Thailand, Malaysia, and then right at the bottom we got Singapore. Now 2014 was a pretty big year, probably one of the biggest years of my life because I moved out of home straight after this Asia trip. I moved up to the Gold Coast for work and spent nearly 5 years there. I don't think I've made it a secret that I'm still super attached to the place, and I think it's just because there's so much to do within a couple of hours radius in any direction. You know, the Gold Coast itself's incredible. You can head out to the hinterland, O'Reilly's, Mount Tamborine. You can go up north and hit up the sunny coast, go south, Byron Bay. You can go east and explore North Stradbroke Island. There's so many things to do within just a couple of hours of the place, and I reckon that was some of the best years of my life. So let's pin the Gold Coast, that southeast Queensland region. So I didn't go anywhere new in 2015, but in 2016, I'd saved up quite a bit of annual leave and spent a lot of the year exploring in my own backyard in Australia. The first one was a solo trip to Tasmania. We abbreviate everything over here. Ticked off a fair few things in Tassie, went to Cradle Mount and the Bay of Fires, saw my first platypus, and I honestly think it's one of Australia's most underrated destinations. It's just untamed natural beauty over there. It's incredible and probably one of the places I want to go back to once the state borders open up here in Australia again. So later in the year, my little brother and I went on a bit of a road trip from Sydney down to Adelaide. We hired a camper van. It may not look like much on the map, but that is a significant distance. We did that over about 3 weeks, so there were some pretty big driving days, but that was heaps of fun. Explored the South Coast, New South Wales. Matthew saw his first snow in Thredbo. I got attacked by an emu, which is probably one of the most memorable things that ever happened in the trip. Matt didn't get it on video, unfortunately, but I was trying to get close to this guy. There was the beautiful snow-capped mountains in the background, and before I know it, I've got this shot. This emu is just sprinting at me. I'd worked with them before, so I kind of knew what to do, just kind of like arced up and made myself look bigger than him. But that shot, it's a crap shot, but it is one of the most memorable things of that trip. Then we went down the Great Ocean Road. We then hopped over on a ferry to go to Kangaroo Island, which we explored for a couple of days. Matt left, and then I flew an hour over to Port Lincoln to go cage diving with great white sharks and swimming with sea lions. Unfortunately, the weather in South Australia at that time was really bad. In fact, there was a stage where the whole state went into blackout. There was like no power in the entire state. And the seal swims got cancelled due to bad weather. And then we went all the way out to find sharks and had no luck there either. But I did get a credit on those experiences, so I was able to fly back in December and get in the water with the sharks and the seals. Highly recommend. All right, I reckon I can stick a few pins in for this one. So we got Melbourne, out west in the snowfields, Adelaide. I think it's okay to chuck a few extra pins in Australia here rather than going state by state. It's my corkboard, I'll do what I want. Okay, now 2017, I went back to Malaysia, but not Peninsular Malaysia, the bit that's under Thailand. Hopped over to Borneo to the state of Sabah. And in Sabah, I jumped on another group tour with Geckos, which is part of Intrepid. There were a lot of Aussies on that tour actually, some really cool people. And it was a lot of nature over there, man. It was like orangutans, sun bears, proboscis monkeys. I was completely in my element. We went out on the river looking for wildlife. We camped out in the jungle. But I reckon the most memorable experience was climbing Mount Kinabalu, or should I say attempting to climb Mount Kinabalu. I'm pretty sure Mount Kinabalu is the tallest peak in Malaysia. It's around 4,000 meters above sea level, and you climb up over 2 days, base camp pretty close to the top, get up early, and then you're meant to summit on that second day and then climb all the way back down on that second day as well. So when it was summit day, we all got up at 2 a.m, super keen to get up there and catch the sunrise, but unfortunately due to bad weather, we were advised not to summit that day. So we kind of just got partway up, watched an okay sunrise, and then climbed all the way back down. And the next day, all I remember is my legs being so sore. I don't think they've ever been so sore. Climbing down was actually harder than climbing up. I guess it's just different muscles you use and stuff, but still super memorable, and it gives me a reason to get back to Sabah and conquer that mountain. Now later in the year, I was able to tick off a new country, which was Vietnam. Now my girlfriend Sammy joined me on this trip as well, and I think this was the one where we started to venture out of our comfort zone a little bit. We were embracing the culture, the street food, we were taking a few more risks, and of all the countries I've been to, Vietnam is probably the one I want to get back to and explore more. I don't know, there's just something about the place. So in the north, we started off in Hanoi, we went to Halong Bay, we got to visit some of the moon bears at the Animals Asia Rescue Center, which was pretty cool. Then we went up to Sapa, and they are definitely a couple of days I'll remember. The first day we were trekking, it was beautiful views. We stayed in a local village where we got to do herbal bars, ate all this amazing food. We tried rice wine for the first time, and the next day was the most insane rain I think I've ever seen. We were drenched 30 seconds into our 6-hour trek. The path we were meant to cross over literally washed away before our very eyes. And despite my best waterproofing measures, trying to keep everything safe, my camera carked it. It was completely unusable for the rest of the trip. Which sucks because a few days later we saw a pangolin, which is like a bucket list animal. I just got this crappy photo on my phone. Then we went down to Ho Chi Minh City, and then we spent a few days relaxing down on Phu Quoc, this island just south of Vietnam. Now, as far as documenting my travels over the years, it was never that consistent. Sometimes I took photos, sometimes I made videos, sometimes I did absolutely nothing. But from 2018 onwards, I put a bit more energy into documenting the trips. Now, 2018 was actually the first time I went to New Zealand, despite it being so close to Australia. And this trip, I specifically planned to go to a place called KAIKOURA. Now, KAIKOURA is known for its marine animal diversity, which was the main premise of the trip. I went to see dolphins, seals, whales, penguins, albatross, and was able to tick all of them off in spectacular fashion. It's an amazing place if you're into that sort of thing, which I obviously am. And yeah, I just hired a car, drove around, spent quite a lot of time on the water. And this is the first time I attempted daily vlogging, which I was super hyped on the idea. I thought I'd be able to do it. Honestly, it was really, really difficult. I think I got about 5 or 6 days in and gave up. The videos are still pretty cool. I'll link them up above, but yeah, I just couldn't stick to the daily vlogging thing, particularly with the type of content that I was trying to get, but it was worth a shot. I have been back to New Zealand a few times over the years, mainly in the North Island, around Auckland, Bay of Islands area, and it's probably one of the top places I'm keen to go and explore more once country borders open up again. So for New Zealand, I'm going to pin the North and the South Island. Now, at the end of 2018, I ticked off another bucket list destination, went to Indonesia for the first time. And Indonesia, that's pretty vague, that's pretty broad. There are hundreds of islands in Indonesia. I've been lucky enough to explore a couple of them, but this first trip was to go to Sumatra, North Sumatra, to go trekking in the jungle. The Sumatra trip was special because we got to spend so much time around these wild orangutans. And although they were wild, they could come or go as they pleased. You just made a connection. If you actually looked at these guys in the eyes, it just hit you to the core. And then we camped out. You could hear all the noises of the jungle as you were trying to get to sleep. We got the river tubes back to civilization at the end. Definitely a destination worth checking out. And then after Sumatra, we went back to Thailand and just chilled out there. Okay, so 2019 was the biggest year of travel yet. It's the year that I decided to quit my job and more or less travel for as long as I could on the funds that I had. I was aiming to last around a year, which I nearly did. I don't need to explain what happened. Let's get stuck into it. Now, the first one on the list was a continent I hadn't been to before. It was Africa, a place I'd wanted to go for so long, and I finally had the opportunity to go see it. So prior to leaving for this trip, I'd actually done quite a lot of research on credit cards and points and things like that. So what I did was I got a new credit card, I booked a tour in Africa, and by getting points from spending that money on booking the tour, I was actually able to get a super cheap flight from Sydney to Johannesburg. It cost me 90 Australian dollars. So how's that for starting your trip? I thought I was gonna be so budget savvy. It didn't last, but hey, I was able to get over there for next to nothing. So I started in South Africa. I was able to explore the Kruger and spend about a week in Cape Town, which is one of the most incredible places. It's just so vibey, and like you're right on the beach. You've got Table Mountain in the background. I can see why people love the city so much. And from there, I joined a G Adventures group and we headed up north through Namibia. We basically, oh no, my little light went out. Okay, well, I guess we're doing this in semi-darkness now. So I joined a G Adventures tour, which I was on for about a month. And we basically got around 4 different countries in this decked out 4-wheel drive bus called the Lando. It was such a good way to get around. And yeah, we camped at 95% of the places we stopped, which was amazing because you could really appreciate Africa in that way. You could hear the animals calling. We could set up a fire every night, have a braai, have a barbecue. That's the sort of stuff I'm super into when I travel. Now, we started off in Namibia and drove all the way up over nearly 2 weeks. That's probably the country we spent the most time in. We went into the Namib Desert and checked out the incredible Dune 45, and I was able to tick off so many wildlife species for the first time in the wild. African elephants, lions, rhino, which were all in Etosha National Park. Then we crossed over Botswana, where we spent some time in the Okavango Delta, went out on the Makoros, camped out there again, saw hippo, buffalo, more elephants. I honestly felt like at times I was in The Lion King. It was just one of these places I had to constantly pinch myself and be like, damn, I've actually made it here. Then we went to Chobe National Park, which is the elephant capital of the world, literally hundreds of elephants before crossing over into Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, of course, we checked out the famous Victoria Falls before heading back down south towards South Africa. We stopped at Matopo National Park and went walking with rhinos, literally got like meters away from these rhinos on foot. It was epic, man. I can hardly even put it into words. And I do recommend doing it with G Adventures in this way and camping. You just get that authentic African experience. And it also brought the group together. I met some incredible people, some I've stayed in touch with, some I've even traveled with since then. It is 100% the way to do it. So for Africa, I've got red pins to symbolize the red sands of the Namib Desert or something like that. South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, and Zimbabwe. This side of the map is going to be full of pins. This side is very bare. In fact, there's only gonna be this one in the US, but I'll be able to fill it in years to come. So after Africa, I flew back to Singapore, met my little brother there. We actually spent a week in Singapore, which anyone that's been there knows that's an incredibly long time. But the highlight of that trip, despite going back to the zoos and Gardens by the Bay and seeing all those very Singapore-y things, the highlight for us this time was the food. We just went from hawker center to hawker center to hawker center, sampling so many different types of food from, you know, like Malaysia, China, it's all like interweaved. We're eating like 5 or 6 meals a day. And by eating at the hawker centers, that is a good way to actually keep your costs down in Singapore. Rather than going to restaurants, we're regularly getting meals for between $3 and $5, which is still pretty expensive by Asian standards. I'm honestly getting hungry just thinking about it. Singapore is a foodie's dream. So after that, I went back up to Malaysia, Peninsular Malaysia, and was able to explore in more depth. Started off in KL and just slowly worked my way north, went to the Cameron Highlands and drank heaps of tea and ate heaps of strawberries. Went to Penang and just ate myself silly there as well. Then went over to the Perhentian Islands. Now, when I was in the Perhentians, I was actually volunteering with a company called EcoTier. I was there for 2 weeks. I was part of an education project which worked with the kids and, you know, you teach them about the different corals around the island, how to protect the environment around the island. And then I actually participated in a sea turtle program. Poaching of sea turtle eggs is still quite a big thing in Malaysia. So essentially what we would do every other night, we'd be camping out on the sand, taking it in shifts and monitor the beaches for turtles that were nesting. If we did come across a nesting turtle, we would take certain measurements and record data on that individual, and then we would actually take the eggs to a secure location where they could be incubated, a spot that was safe from poachers, which could be managed by the project. I also did a lot of free diving, doing data collection on the resident turtles in the area, even did a bit of scuba diving, which I hadn't done for a long time. So that's not really a new country, I just explored it in a different way, so no more new pins. After Malaysia, I flew back to Indonesia, and I actually flew back to Sumatra straight away, less than a year since I'd done my last trip there, because I loved it so much. I met up with my mate Welly, who I actually met on the Africa tour, and we went out into the jungle for 5 days. That is an experience and really tests your physical and mental state. Because we were there for 5 days, I went further into the jungle than I did with Sammy, which also meant the tube ride back at the end was about 2 hours coming all the way back in. So much fun, it's like a roller coaster through the jungle. After Sumatra, I went to Bali, saw what all the fuss was about there, met Sammy, did some diving, we stayed in the Bubble Hotel, and then I went to Komodo, which still to this day I think is the best place I've ever been. Spent a couple of days there, did a group tour, then I did a private tour where I actually stayed on the island with the dragons. We went trekking out into the middle of the island and got up close and personal. Really up close and personal with these modern day dinosaurs. After Komodo, I headed east on the island of Flores, and compared to a lot of other places in Indonesia, like Bali, it doesn't really have a whole lot of tourism going on. So that was a pretty special experience. I met a guy called Som who took me to his village. Honestly, they didn't even speak Indonesian there. They spoke their own language. We just hung out, had dinner, had coffee, watched the sunset. Flores is kind of one of those places I hope doesn't develop too quickly, because at the moment it is real, it's authentic, and was definitely a unique experience for me, something I hadn't done before, visiting a place like that. So 2 more pins, one for Bali, one for Flores. They're so small, I hardly even register on the map. Now, after my month in Indonesia, I actually went back to Malaysia to do some volunteer work. Malaysia is the country I spent the most time in last year. It was nearly 4 months. And I was volunteering with the Gibbon Conservation Society. So when I got there, it was a very new project. And the premise of it is these guys are actually working to rehabilitate gibbons that were a part of the illegal pet trade, try and rehabilitate them to the point where they can be released back out into the wild. So when I was working with them there, I was staying in a very rural area in the middle of Malaysia and basically just stayed involved in the husbandry and care of the gibbons and trying to build this up into a bigger project. These guys are getting a lot more gibbons in that they've rescued. They've been able to better establish a volunteer and internship program. And I guess that's the closest I've come to living in another country. I was just staying in this little house in the middle of the village. I was on my own most of the time, except when I was working. And the people that I met over there, they honestly made me feel like family. And it makes me excited to go back and see them again, see how things are building up and progressing, and be a part of it again. So at the very end of 2019, after Malaysia, I came back to Australia just for a couple of months to make a little bit of money, plan what my next move was, and I planned a trip to India and Nepal. Now, because of everything that happened, that trip did get cut short. I was only in India for about 2 weeks. I still got to experience the Holi festival, which was incredible. I did that trip with G Adventures too. Then afterwards, I was meant to go to Nepal for 3 weeks with some mates. We were going to do some trekking in the jungles, experience the wildlife, get up into the mountains and do some trekking up there too. But alas, it never happened. And that brings me to now. I'm here in Australia. I don't want to say I'm stuck in Australia because I've been taking this time to explore a lot within my own backyard. As I've mentioned, Australia is an absolutely massive place and there's so much to see. And I want to encourage other people, don't feel like you're stuck just because you can't travel internationally. Use this time to see what's just around the corner, appreciate it for what it is, and just try and keep that travel bug alive. So there we go, that's the corkboard done up until this point of my life. These are the countries I've been to. I think it's 16 countries in total. Not that that's the most important thing, and I'm sure over the years this will become a lot more colorful, be able to put a lot more pins in. I really need to explore Europe and the Americas. Those places are looking completely bare at the moment, but it'll all happen in due course. Now, when I initially bought this corkboard, it came with these little silver and gold pins for past adventures and future adventures. I thought it would look a little bit cooler with the color. What I'm actually gonna do now is pin the 5 countries that I want to travel to next, which gives me something to be excited for. So those countries would have to be Nepal, because I was due to go there anyway. Everything was already planned. I know exactly what I want to see. Sri Lanka. I reckon there'd be some awesome safaris you could do around there. One of the easiest places to see elephants anywhere in the world, leopards, plus just the culture, the food. Looks like a really cool place. I'm keen to get to Kenya to see the Great Migration. Antarctica, because it's Antarctica. And the last place doesn't actually have anything to do with nature at all. I've been really keen for a while to go to Turkey. Alright, so that's my corkboard travel map. I hope I'll be able to add more to it sooner rather than later. Hope you enjoyed it. It was a good little trip through memory lane for me. Thanks for letting me ramble on, guys. I'll see you in the next one.